Okay, we're here for a memory light read-through by your very own one and only host, Calculator Ferret. So let's get right into this, people. Part 3. The return, the revenge of the shit. Nah, just kidding. Part 3, let's do it. Talmanes threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding the Trollocs' axe. The ground trembled as the axe broke cobblestones. He ducked and rammed his blade to the creature's thigh. The thing had a bull snout, and it threw back its head to bellow. "Burn me, but you have horrible breath," Talmanes growled, whipping his sword free and stepping back. The thing went down on one knee, and Talmanes hacked off its weapon hand. Panting, Talmanes danced back as his two companions struck the Trolloc through the back with spears. You always wanted to fight Trollocs in a group. Well, you always wanted to fight any one of our team on your side, but it was more important of Trollocs, considering their size and strength. Corpses lay like heaps of trash in the night. Talmanes had been forced to fire the city gate's guards' houses to give light. The half-dozen or so guards who had remained were now recruits in the band, for the time being. Like a black tide, the Trollocs began to retreat from the gate. They had never extended themselves in pushing for it, or rather being pushed for it. There had been a half-man with this crew. Talmanes lowered his hand to the wound in his side. It was wet. The guard-house fires were burning low. He'd have to order a few of the shops set on fire. That risked letting the spray spread. But the city was already lost. No sense in holding back now. "Brent!" he yelled. "Set that stable aflame!" Sandeb came up as Brent went running past with a torch. "They'll be back. Soon, probably." Talmanes nodded. Now that the fighting was done, townspeople began to flood out of alleys and recesses, timidly making for the gate and, presumably, safety. We can't stay here and hold this gate," Sandep said. "The dragons—" "I know. How many men did we lose?" "I don't have a count yet. 100 at least." "Light, Matt's gonna have my hide when he hears about that." Matt hated losing troops. There was a softness to the man equal to his genius, an odd but inspiring combination. "Send some scouts to watch the city roadways nearby for approaching shadow spawn. Heap some of those Trolloc carcasses to make barriers. They'll work as well as anything else. You, soldier!" One of the wearied soldiers walking back froze. He wore the Queen's colors. "My lord? We need to let people know this gate out of the city is safe. Is there a horn call that Andorian peasants would recognize? Something that would bring them here?" "Peasants," the man said thoughtfully. He didn't seem to like the word. They didn't use it often, here in Andor. "Yes, the Queen's March." "Sandip?" "I'll set the sounders to it, Talmanes," Sandip said. "Good." Talmanes knelt to clean his sword on a fallen Trolloc shirt, his side aching. The wound wasn't bad. Not by normal terms. Just a nick, really. The shirt was so grimy he almost hesitated to wipe his weapon, but Trolloc blood was bad for a blade, so he swabbed down the sword. He stood up, ignoring the pain in his side, then walked towards the gate, where he'd tied Selphar. He hadn't dared trust the horse against Shadowspawn. He was a good gelding, but not borderland trained. None of the men questioned him as he climbed to the saddle and turned Selphar westward, out of the city gate, towards those mercenaries he'd seen watching earlier. Talmanes had been surprised to find that they moved closer to the city. Fighting drew warriors like fire draws cold travelers on a winter night. They hadn't joined the battle. As Talmanes rode up, he was greeted by a small group of the sellswords, 6 men with thick arms and, likely, thick wits. They recognized him in the band. Matt was downright famous these days, and so was the band by association. They undoubtedly also noticed the troll-like bloodstains in Talmanes' clothing and the bandage on his side. That wound had really begun to burn fiercely now. Talmanes reined in Selphar, then patiently patted at his saddlebags. "I stowed some tobacco around here somewhere." "Well?" one of the mercenaries asked. The leader was easy to pick out. He had the finest armor. A man often became leader of a band like this by staying alive. Talmanes fished his second-best pipe out of his saddlebag. Where was that tobacco? He never took the best pipe into battle. His father had called that bad luck. "Ah," he thought, pulling out the tobacco pouch. He placed some in the bowl, then removed its lighting twig, and leaned over to stick it into a torch held by a wary mercenary. "We aren't going to fight unless paid," the leader said. He's a stout man, surprisingly clean, though he could have done with a beard trim. Talmanes lit his pipe, puffing smoke out. Behind him, the horns started blowing. The Queen's March turned out to be a catchy tune. The horns were accompanied by shouts, and Talmanes looked back. Trollocs in the main threw away a larger batch this time. Crossbowmen fell into rank and began loosing at an order Talmanes couldn't hear. "We're not—" the headman began again. "Do you know what this is?" Talmanes asked softly around his pipe. "This is the beginning of the end. This is the fall of nations and the unification of humankind. This is the last battle, you bloody fool!" The man shuffled uncomfortably. Do you speak for the Queen?" the leader said, trying to salvage something. "I just want to see my men taken care of." "If you fight," Talmanes said, "I'll promise you a great reward." The man waited. "I promise you that you'll continue to draw breath," Talmanes said, taking another puff. Is that a threat, Carian?" Talmanes blew out smoke, then leaned back down from his side, putting his face closer to the leader. "I killed a Myrddraal tonight, Andorian," he said softly. "It nicked me with a Thekandar blade, and the wound has gone black. That means I have a few hours at best before the blade's poison burns you from the inside out, and I die in the most agonizing way a man can. Therefore, friend, I suggest that you trust me when I tell you that I really have nothing to lose." The man blinked. "You have two choices," Talmanes said, turning his horse and speaking loudly to the troop. "You can fight like the rest of us and help this world see new days, and maybe you'll save some coin in the end. I can't promise that. Your other option is to sit here, watch people be slaughtered, and tell yourselves that you don't work for free. If you're lucky, and the rest of us save the world without you, you'll draw breath long enough to be strung up by your cowardly necks." Silence. Horns blew from the darkness behind. The chief sellsword looked towards his commands. They nodded in agreement. "Go help hold that gate," Talmanes said. "I'll recruit the other mercenary bands to help." Leilwin surveyed the multitude of camps dotting the place known as the Field of Myrddraal. In the darkness, with the moon not due to rise for some time, she could almost imagine the cook fires were shipborne lanterns in a busy port at night. That was probably a sight she would never see again. Leilwin Chipless was not a captain. She would never be one again. To wish otherwise was to defy the very nature of who she had become. Bale put a hand on her shoulder, thick fingers, rough from many days of work. She reached up and rested her hand on his. It had been simple to slip through one of those gateways being made at Tar Valon. Bale knew his way around the city, though he had grumbled about being there. "This place do set the hair on my arms to points," he said, "and I did wish to never walk these streets again, I did wish it." He'd come for her anyways. A good man, Bale Doman. As good as she'd found these unfamiliar lands, despite moments of unsavory trading in his past. That was behind him. If he didn't understand the right way of things, he did try. "This do be a sight," he said, scanning the quiet sea of lights. What want you to do now?" "We'll find Nineveh Elmira or Elaine Trankard." Bale scratched at his bearded chin. He wore it after the Illionaire style, the upper lip shaved. The hair on his head was of varying lengths. He stopped shaving a portion of his head now that she had freed him. She'd done that so they could marry, of course. It was well. The shaven head would have drawn attention here. He'd done quite well as Sojin once certain issues had been resolved. In the end, however, she had to admit that Bale Doman was not meant to be Sojin. He was too rough cut, and no tie would ever soften those rough edges. That was how she wanted him, though she'd never say so out loud. "It do be late, Leilwin," he said. "Perhaps we should wait until morning." No. There was a quiet to the camps, true, but it was not the quiet of slumber. It was the quiet of ships waiting for the right winds. She knew little of what was happening here. She hadn't dared open her mouth in Tar Valon to ask questions, lest her accent reveal her as Ciachan. A gathering this size did not occur without dedicated planning. She was surprised that they mentioned any of it. She'd heard of the meeting here, one that most of the Aes Sedai had come to attend. This exceeded anything she'd anticipated. She started across the field, and Bale followed, both of them joining the group of Tar Valon servants they had been allowed to accompany, thanks to Bale's bribe. His methods did not please her, but she had been able to think. She had not been able to think of it, but she had been able to think of no other way. She tried not to think too much about his original contracts in Tarvalon. Well, if she was never to be on a ship again, then Bale would find no more opportunities for smuggling. That was a small comfort. You're a ship's captain. That's all you know, all you want. And now, shipless. She shivered and clenched her hands into fists to keep from wrapping her arms around herself. To spend the rest of her days in these unchanging lands, never able to move at a pace brisker than what a horse could provide, never to smell the deep sea air, never to point her prow towards the horizon, hoist anchor, set sail, and simply... She shook herself. Find Nineveh and Elaine. She might be shipless, but she would not let herself slip into the depths and drown. She set her course and started walking. Bale hunched down slightly, suspicious, and tried to watch all around them at once. He also glanced at her a few times, lips drawn out to a line. She knew what that meant by now. "What is it?" she asked. "Leilwin, what do we be doing here?" "I've told you. We need to find—" "Yes, but why? What do you think you will do? They do be Aes Sedai. They showed me respect before. And so you do think they'll take us in?" "Perhaps." She eyed him. "Speak it, Bale. You have something on your mind." He sighed. Why do we need be taken in, Leilwin? We could find ourselves a ship somewhere in our arid domain, where there be no Aes Sedai or CHN. "I wouldn't run the kind of ship you prefer." He regarded her flatly. "I do know how to run an honest business, Leilwin. It would no be—" She raised a hand, quieting him, then rested it on his shoulder. They stopped on the pathway. "I know, my love. I know. My speaking words to distract, to set us spinning in a current that goes nowhere." "Why?" That single word scratched at her like a splinter under a fingernail. Why? Why had she come all this way, traveling a matching with Athone, putting herself dangerously near the daughter of the Nine Moons? My people live with a grave misconception of the world, Bale. In doing so, they create injustice. "They did reject you, Leilwin," he said softly. You do no longer be one of them." "I will always be one of them. My name was revoked, but not my blood." "I do be sorry for the insult." She nodded curtly. "I am still loyal to the Empress, may she live forever. But the Damane, they are the very foundation for her rule. They are the means by which she creates order, by which she holds the Empire together. And the Damane are a lie. Suldam could channel. The channel could be learned. Now, months after she had discovered the truth, her mind could not encompass all the implications. Another might have been more interested in the political advantage. Another might have returned to CHN and used this to gain power. Almost, Leilwin wished she had done that. Almost. But the pleas of the Suldam, growing to know those Aes Sedai, who were nothing like what she'd been taught. Something had to be done. And yet, in doing it, did she risk causing the entire empire to collapse? Her movements must be considered very, very carefully, like the last rounds of a game of Shaw. The two continued to follow the line of servants in the dark. One Aes Sedai or another often sent servants for something they'd left in the White Tower, but traveling back and forth was common. A good thing for Leilwin. They passed the perimeter of the Aes Sedai camp without being challenged. She was surprised at the ease of it until she spied several men alongside the path. They were very easy to miss. Something about them blended into the surroundings, particularly in the blackness. She noticed them only when one moved, breaking off from the others to fall into step a short distance behind her and Bale. In seconds, it was obvious they had picked the two of them out. Perhaps it was the way they walked, the way they held themselves. They'd been able to dress plainly, though Bale's beard would mark him as an alienator. Leilwin stopped, laying a hand on Bale's arm, and turning to confront the one following them. A warder, she assumed from descriptions. The warder stalked up to them. They were still near the perimeter of the camp, the tent organized in rings. She had noticed with discomfort that some of the tents glowed with a light too steady to come from candle or lamp. "Ho!" Bale said, raising a friendly hand to the warder. "We do be seeking an Aes Sedai named Nineveh Elmira. If she is not here, perhaps one named Elaine Trakand?" "Neither makes their camp here," the warder said. He was a long-armed man, and he moved with grace. His features, framed by long, dark hair, looked unfinished. chiseled from rock by a sculptor who had lost interest in the project halfway through. Ah, Bale said. That do be our mistake, then. Could you point us to where they do be making camp? It do be a matter of some urgency, you see. He spoke smoothly, easily. Bale could be quite charming, when necessary. More so than Leilwin could. That depends, the warder said. Your companion, she wishes to see Talmanes Aes Sedai too? She do, and Bale began, but the warder held up a hand. I would hear it from her, he said, inspecting Leilwin. It do be what I wish, Leilwin said. My aged grandmother. These women, they do promise us payment, and I do mean to have it. Aes Sedai do not lie. Everyone do know this fact. If you will not take this to them, then provide someone who will. The warder hesitated, eyes widening at the barrage of words. Then blessedly he nodded. This way. He led them away from the center of the camp, but he no longer seemed suspicious. Leilwin let out a quiet breath and fell into step with Bale behind the warder. Bale looked at her proudly, grinning so widely he'd certainly have given the two of them away if the warder had looked back. She couldn't help a hint of a smile herself. The Eleanor accent had not come naturally here to her, but both agreed that she ancient tongue was dangerous, particularly when traveling among Aes Sedai. Bale claimed that no true Eleanor would accept her as one of them, but she was clearly good enough to fool an outsider. She felt relieved when they moved away from the Aes Sedai camp in the dark. Having two friends, they were friends, despite the troubles of one another, who were Aes Sedai did not mean she wanted to be inside a camp full of them. The warder led them to an open area near the field, in the middle of the field of Myrddraal. There was a very large camp here, with a great number of small tents. Ale, Bale said softly to her. There do be tens of thousands of them. Interesting. Fearsome stories were told of Ale, legends that could not all possibly be true. Still, the tales, if exaggerated, suggested these were the finest warriors this side of the ocean. She would have welcomed sparring with one or two of them, had the situation been different. She rested a hand on the side of her pack. She stowed her cudgel in a long pocket on the side, easily within reach. They certainly were tall folk, these Ale. She passed some of them lounging by campfires, seemingly relaxed. Those eyes, however, watched more cleanly than the warder's had. A dangerous people, ready for killing while relaxing beside fires. She could not make out the banners that flapped above this camp in the night sky. Which king or queen do rule this camp, warder? She called. The man turned to face her, his features lost in the night shadow. Your king, Eleanor. At her side, Bale stiffened. The dragon reborn. She was proud that she didn't miss a step as they walked, but it was a near thing. A man who could channel. And that was worse, far worse, than the Aes Sedai. The warder led them to a tent near the center of camp. You were fortunate, her light is on. There were no guards at the tent entrances, so he called in and received permission to enter. He pulled back the flap of one arm and nodded to them, yet his other hand was on his sword, and he stood in fighting posture. She hated putting that sword to her back, but she entered as ordered. The tent was lit by one of those unnatural globes of light, and a familiar woman in a green dress sat at a writing desk, working on a letter. Nineveh Elmira was what, back in Sietchan, one would call a Talarti, a woman with fire in her soul. Leilwin had come to understand that Aes Sedai were supposed to be calm as placid waters. Well, this woman might be that on occasion, but she was the kind of placid water one found one bend away from a furious waterfall. Nineveh continued to write as they entered. She no longer wore braids. Her hair was loose around the top of her shoulders. It was a sight as strange as a ship with no mast. I'll be with you in a minute, Sleet, Nineveh said. Honestly, the way you lot have been hovering over me lately makes me think of a mother bird who has lost an egg. Don't your Aes Sedai have work for you to do? Land is important to many of us, Nineveh Sedai, the warder, Sleet, said in a calm, gravelly voice. Oh, and he's not important to me? Honestly, I wonder if we should send you out to chop wood or something. If one more warder comes to see if I need... She glanced up, finally seeing Leilwin. Nineveh's face immediately grew impassive. Cold. Burningly cold. Leilwin found herself sweating. This woman had her life in her hands. Why couldn't it have been Lane that Sleet had brought them to? Perhaps they shouldn't have mentioned Nineveh. These two demand to see you, Sleet said. His sword was out of its sheath. Leilwin had seen that. Doman muttered softly to himself. They claim that you promised to pay them money, and they have come for it. They did not identify themselves in the tower, however, and found a way to slip through one of the gateways. The man is from Ilion. The woman somewhere else. She's disguising her accent. Well, perhaps she wasn't as good as with the accent as she'd assumed. Leilwin glanced at his sword. If she rode to the side, he'd probably miss a strike, assuming he went for the chest or neck. She could pull the cudgel and... She was facing an ace today. She'd never stand up from that roll. She'd be caught in a weave of one power, or worse. I know them, Sleet, Nineveh said, voice cool. You did well in bringing them to me. Thank you. His sword was sheathed at once, and Leilwin felt cold air in her neck as he slipped out of the tent, quiet as a whisper. If you come to beg forgiveness, Nineveh said, you come to the wrong person. I have half a mind to give you over to the warders to question. Maybe they can glean something useful about your people from that treacherous mind of yours. It is good to see you again, too, Nineveh, Leilwin said coolly. So what happened? Nineveh demanded. What happened? What was the woman talking about? I did try, Bale suddenly said regretfully. I did fight them, but I was taken easily. They could have fired my ship, sunk us all, killed my men. Better than you and all aboard should have died, Illionaire, Nineveh said. The Terangral ended up in the hands of one of the Forsaken. Samurai was hiding among the Sietchin, pretending to be some kind of judge. A truth speaker? Is that the word? Yes, they mentioned softly. She understood now. I regret breaking my oath, but... You regret it? Agonine, Nineveh said, standing, knocking her chair back. Regret is not a word I would use for endangering the world itself, bringing us to the brink of darkness and almost shoving us over the edge. She had copies of that device made, woman. One ended up around the neck of the Dragon Reborn. The Dragon Reborn himself, controlled by one of the Forsaken. Nineveh flung her hands into the air. Light! We were heartbeats away from the end of the world because of you. The end of everything. No more pattern, no more world, everything. Millions of lives could have winked out because of your carelessness. Leilwin's failure seemed monumental suddenly. Her life lost. Her very name lost. Her ship, stripped from her by the daughter of the Nine Moons herself. All were immaterial in light of this. I did fight, Bale said more firmly. I did fight with what I could give. I should have joined you, it appears, Leilwin said. I did try to explain that, Bale said grimly. Many times now, burned me, but so I did. Bah, Nineveh said, raising a hand to her forehead. What are you doing here, Agonine? I had hoped you were dead. If you had died trying to keep your oath, then I could not have blamed you. I handed this oath myself, Leilwin thought. A price paid for my life. The only way out. Well, Nineveh glared at her. Out of it, Agonine. I no longer bear that name, Leilwin went down on her knees. I had all stripped from me, including my honor, it now appears. I give myself to you as payment. Nineveh snorted. We don't keep people as if they are animals, unlike you, Sietchin. Leilwin continued kneeling. Bale rested a hand on her shoulder, but did not try to pull her to her feet. He understood well enough why she had to do as she did. He was quite nearly civilized. On your feet, Nineveh snapped. Light, Agonine, I remember you being so strong you could chew rocks and spit out sand. It is my strength that compels me, she said, lowering her eyes. Did Nineveh not understand how difficult this was? It would be easier to slit her own throat when she had not the honor left to demand such an easy end. Stand! Leilwin did as told. Nineveh grabbed her cloak off the bed and threw it on. Come, we'll take you to the Amyrlin. Maybe she'll know what to do with you. Nineveh barged out into the night, and Leilwin followed. Her decision had been made. There was only one path that made sense, one way to preserve a shred of honor, and perhaps to help her people survive the lies they've been telling themselves for so long. Leilwin shipless now belonged to the White Tower. Whatever they said, whatever they tried to do with her, that fact would not change. They owned her. She would be a Decaval to this Amyrlin, and would ride the storm like a ship whose sails had been shredded by the wind. Perhaps, with what remained of her honor, she could earn this woman's trust.